All right, good morning, everybody. Like Luke said, today's theme is receive generously. And we're talking about not only receiving the gifts that God has given to us, but also receiving the things in our lives that might be difficult to receive. Events that happen, moments in our lives, that in the moment, or when that thing happens, feels terrible, or feels unpleasant, or feels extremely happy, or brings us joy. All of our lives are filled with different moments, and these moments have a range from good to bad and everywhere in between. And yet we have a God, like Alyssa said, who is a master chef, who weaves these ingredients of our lives together. And hopefully we can receive those things in a way that helps us to live a generous life. This morning, our speaker is Katie Asencio, and I'm not going to say much else about her, except for that I think she has a life in which she has been given ingredients, and God is using those ingredients to shape her and to shape those around her in such a unique way. So please, welcome.
Katie Asencio. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of my life and the things that I've faced in my life that in the moment seemed awful. I was born and raised here in Michigan. I have two older brothers. Some of you might know one of them, Marcos Asencio. He graduated in 2014. And so my parents are two illegal immigrants from Guatemala. And in third grade, I think at the end of third grade, police came to our house and took my mom, and they basically put her in jail for 2 months because she was an illegal immigrant and they wanted to deport her. So for 2 months and a half, I would go with my brother to Battle Creek, and I would talk to her through a screen and a phone. And we basically tried for 2 months to get her out while they wanted to deport her back to Guatemala. And thankfully, through lawyers and stuff, we were able to get her out. And after that, I lived a kind of normal childhood. My parents would have to go to Detroit once a month to make sure that, they hadn't fled the country, things were okay. So by the end of 6th grade, they basically said you have two options. We force you to leave and we deport you and you have to move back to Guatemala, or you can leave on your own free will and book a plane back home. And so they basically decided to do that. And since I was too little, because I was in 6th grade, they were like, hey, you're coming with us, but your two brothers get to stay behind. So then, when we moved there for the first 3 months, I lived in a room that I shared with my parents, and for any preteen, that's a nightmare. Sharing a room with your parents is awful. I love them to death. But yeah, so that's how we lived, and I lived out of my suitcase. And there in Guatemala, I attended a missionary school, and it was an American missionary school. It was pretty good. I mean, I didn't like it at first. I hated it. But afterwards, it was a lot better. And then, fast forward to the end of 9th grade, my parents started having fights, and it progressively got worse to the point where it would happen, I think, every day. And so, by the beginning of 10th grade, I came home and my parents were yelling, and it was something that happened every day, but I had reached my height, and I was like, I can't take this anymore, so I came out of my room, I yelled at them, which is probably not something I should have done, but I yelled at them and ran back inside. And so, after a few hours, my dad had left, and a discipleship teacher that I had at my school came into my house, and she basically said, hey, this is what happened, your dad cheated on your mom and physically abused her. Sorry. So that was a point in my life where it was really hard because this was someone that I trusted. looked up to. Sorry for crying. But after that, fast forward to about March of the next year, I was in volleyball practice, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe, and I'd been sick before that. And then they were like, hey, take it easy, go home. And so we went to the doctors, they took blood samples, and I had been diagnosed with leukemia a few days after I'd stayed at the hospital. And I'll be honest, I was scared, I was crying, because I was like, well, I'm gonna die, which sounds morbid, but that's my mentality, that's how I dealt with it. And so after that, I was like, I had a relationship with God, but at that moment, my relationship grew. And it grew because I realized that at the end of the day, I could die or more bad things could keep happening in my life, but the only person I could really rely on was God. And through all of those hard situations, through being bedridden for 3 months, learning how to walk again, learning how to use my muscles, saying goodbye about 20 times in my life, I learned the hardest lesson through all of those hardships, and I learned thankfulness, and I learned to be thankful in every hardship that had happened, because as soon as I relied on God, and as soon as God opened me up, it made me turn to Him, and I learned the most important and hardest lesson in my life, and that was finding joy in every circumstance. And I don't want you to confuse happiness and joy, because happiness is something that is circumstantial. Happiness is something that if something goes great, you're happy, and then as soon as something bad happens, you're sad. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about joy, and joy is something that you carry through those hard circumstances. It's something that you carry throughout all of those hardships. And maybe your hardships aren't the same as mine. Maybe your hardships are not having any friends, or failing a test, or I don't know, or maybe you have it worse, I don't know. But I realized that nowhere in the Bible does God promise our life to be easy. And the one thing I learned is that it gets better. And I'm not saying it gets better as in life gets better, because that's not a promise I can make, and that's not a promise God makes. But what I did learn was that it gets better in the sense of your attitude gets better, and the way that you see all of your circumstances changes. And after that, you're joyful even when you're in a hospital bed, or you're joyful even when your family is split apart. And so, yeah, the one thing I want you to take away from this is that as soon as you turn to God, it gets better, because your attitude gets better. So.